Hello and welcome back to another episode of your featured practice owner on the Private Practice Growth Club YouTube channel. I'm really excited to introduce my guest today, Nicky Abdinor. I've been following Nicky. I've been following you for a while, especially because obviously as an occupational therapist, you know, the work you do with Nicky's Drive is very relevant to the kinds of things and I used to work in spinal cord injury. So, we had a lot of clients that, needed adaptations for driving and things like that. I've never done that work myself, but obviously that's how I got to know you initially, before I got to know you as psychologist and speaker. But so that makes me really excited to have you on, and of course also your work in private practice education. So I've kind of given up tidbits about who you are and what you do, but I'd like you to introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tasmin. So I'm Nicky Abdinor. I'm a registered clinical psychologist. I am based in Cape Town in South Africa, and I mostly work online with adult patients. I'm also the founder of the nonprofit Nicky's Drive, which funds car adaptations for people with disabilities. Something you might know about me, or maybe not, is that I always say that I was born without arms and not without attitude. So I'm always very excited to help other people with their mobility and their independence. In addition to that, I know I sound like a little bit of an overachiever here, but I'm also a keynote speaker at conferences and events. So that's how I divide my working time between my practice, Nicky's Drive, and my conference talks.
I think what really struck me when I read a little bit about you on the Nicky's Drive page is the fact that you went to a mainstream school. And that was amazing to me. I've always believed in inclusive education, but I've never seen examples of it in action that really working well. And so tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, well, I love telling that story. And first of all, one part of that story that I think is so important is that OT was a big part of the story. When I grew up in East London, which if you're from South Africa, you'll know it's a very small town. And I don't even know if there were any OTs in East London at the time. But my family, we traveled to Cape Town once a year in my early developmental years to see an orthopedic surgeon because of my back and my whole body structure. I know I always say I'm born without arms, but my disability is quite a lot more complicated. And I would see an occupational therapist. And at that stage, it was called the Princess Alice Hospital. And there was an occupational therapist named Keynote that really encouraged me to use my feet and to develop fine motor skills. So that was a big part of my story. But going to mainstream schooling, I think growing up in East London, a smaller community, definitely people got to know me. So I think that helped in kind of giving me a step into mainstream schooling. And I think when people saw my courage and determination and, just can-do attitude, that they did want to give me the opportunity. I mean, inclusive education was not the norm back then. I'm giving away my age, but a few decades ago. And I heard an amazing story that I want to quickly tell you that I only learned later in life, is that the first day that I arrived at school, the teacher prepared the kids the day before, which I think is such a lovely way of introducing me to the school. And I learned that what she did was she told all the children in the class that they need to paint their picture today, but they need to paint it using their feet. And you can imagine the kids had a lot of fun. And then at lunchtime, she said to everyone, I want you to eat your snack, but I want you to sit on your hands while you're trying to eat your snack. And then they thought this was absolutely hilarious. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the day, the teacher said to everyone, tomorrow we have a special girl coming to our school. Her name is Nicky. She has no arms and she uses her feet. I mean, there's no better way to introduce me. I always joke to people that I arrived a mini celebrity. And everybody wanted to be friends with me. And I think what a great way. I mean, imagine it had been different. And I'd arrived there with no one being prepared. It might have been a lot harder for me to adapt, and also for the rest of the class to adapt for me. And I just think I'm very well, I am very grateful for that grounding that I had in early childhood development, also going then on to grade one, being at an incredible school in East London called Clarendon. And that really gave me the foundations to continue through mainstream education and then go on to Stellenbosch University. So it really is a story of how inclusive education can work with a bit of creativity and open-mindedness.
It reminded me actually while you were talking, I just had this imagery in my mind of this Instagram reel I saw of a little girl who had a prosthetic leg put on, not even a prosthetic, it was one of those blade legs. And she's little, she could have been probably grade 1 or 2. And the mom was obviously nervous for her to go back to school, but the videos of her arriving on the playground for the first time and all of her little friends coming and giving a hug and looking at it, and they're so fascinated, but in such a happy kind of joyful way. And then she started running and they all started running with her in their little school uniforms. It was so cute, and that just brought that imagery to me that we underestimate children if we prepare them well enough with the tools to and that teacher obviously prepared them so it wasn't a shock, because it's something new that they've never seen or experienced before, that it becomes something that is exciting. So that's amazing. And I also want to just say that it's so funny that you said that you went to Princess Alice Hospital as a child, because actually that is how I discovered OT. I was in high school. We were required to do community service hours, and I chose to do mine at Princess Alice. My mom was born also with a defect of her foot. She had, she had polio, which caused the defect of her foot. So one foot is quite badly deformed, and she actually had to wear a big boot and all of these things. And she always told us the story of how she always wasn't allowed to participate in the sports, even though she could run faster than most of the children. But because that time when she was a child, it was there was a lot of discrimination against disability. And she always tells the story of how she used to go to Princess Alice and had to stay over at Princess Alice. So when I had to do my community service, I went to Princess Alice to do my volunteer work. And I walked past one of the wards or something, and I looked down and I saw these two people in green uniforms busy with a kid who, at the time I didn't know, but the kid had cerebral palsy. And they were busy doing something with the kid, and I was so fascinated. And I went to ask them, what do they do? And they said, they're fourth-year occupational therapy students, and they use play as a form of meaningful occupation to get the child to develop the skills. And from that day on, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And so it's really so such a full circle moment to now speak to you and hear that that's actually where you actually received occupational therapy. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, I mean, you went through this journey of going through mainstream, and you said you went to Stellenbosch University. Did you, was clinical psychology what you studied from the beginning? Is that something that you've always known you wanted to do?
Well, I've actually, it becomes a little bit complicated, but when I was in high school, my story about, everybody's got their story, and your story is Princess Alice. My story to become a psychologist actually started at Crescent Clinic, which is in Claremont in Cape Town. I had a friend at school, in high school, who suffered from depression and anxiety. And during our school holidays, she actually went to Crescent Clinic for some treatment. And I went to visit her as much as I could. And that really spurred my interest in the field of psychology. I don't even know if I knew what a psychologist was before that. And got to know how it really helped her develop skills to really cope better with her anxiety and depression and be able to, cope at school. And I was really impressed with that. I could strongly see the link between our two situations, her with a psychological challenge and me with a physical one, and both just wanting to be independent and leading fulfilling lives. So that's where my interest sparked in psychology. But I'm sure everybody who's listening that studied psychology knows that the minute you say that you want to become a psychologist, you get told you're never going to be selected for masters.
Yeah.
So I was told that when I applied at university, they also said choose a selection course so that you can also get into res. So I ended up choosing a BA in social work with the intention of becoming a psychologist. But I thought, okay, well, that's not a bad plan to do social work and then go into psychology. So if this doom and gloom is really true, that I'm not going to get into masters, I can at least become a social worker. And, I spent the first half of my first year telling everyone, I'm studying social work, but I want to be a psychologist. But, it ended up being a bit of a blessing in disguise because I loved social work, and social work gave me such good grounding for a career in psychology. So I did 3 years of social work. I majored in social work and psychology. And then I think I gained such great practical experience through social work, which we don't often get in psychology until much later. So then I went on to do my honors in psychology, and then I, lo and behold, got selected for masters in clinical psychology. And I think part of the reason was I had very strong reference reports from my social work lecturers as well. So, and lots of practical experience, even though I was very young at the time.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things in a lot of the work that I do with young adults or teenagers, and they thinking about like what they're going to do after school and what subjects they need to choose. I have a daughter also has to choose subjects. One thing to note is that nothing you do is set in stone, that if you choose this path, you're like fixed with that, right? And sometimes doing one thing leads to another. All you have to be aware of is keep your eyes open for opportunities, like keep your eyes open for how the paths are opening up. Every time you take one decision, multiple branches come off. You just need to be aware of it and what your values are, what it is you enjoy, what's going to give you passion. And then as you move along, you might find a different path to that. So the next question then is, so then you got to become a psychologist. What was obviously there's so many different areas in mental health that one can work in. How did you decide what to focus on? And did that focus change over the years? Because you've been in practice for like 19 years, right? So has the practice, like, what did you focus on initially, and did that change over the time?
Yeah, I think everyone's also, like you say, you go in such different directions and have different ideas. And I think a lot of people studying psychology want to be child psychologists. Like, that's the first thing. And then they work in a child psychiatric unit and deal with a lot of parents. And they're like, I don't want to work with children anymore. So it's quite interesting. I think I also had like kind of that idealized, probably CSI inspired idea of wanting to be a forensic psychologist.
Okay.
So one of the best books, and I know it's recently been made into a series on Showmax, was Mickey Pistorius's Catch Me a Killer.
Wow.
And she was a forensic psychologist, worked with the police, and I just wanted to do that so badly. And then, funny enough, the opportunity arose when I did my community service year, and I was placed at Lentegeur Psychiatric Forensic Unit. And I thought, yay, like I'm really like getting into forensics. Yeah. And I mean, it was an incredible year, challenging and frustrating and enjoyable all at once. But I definitely left that year knowing, okay, forensics is not exactly what I want to be doing. Yeah. And then my path kind of changed, and I started doing some sessional work when I graduated and registered as a clinical psychologist. I did some sessional work at the WCRC, Western Cape Rehab Center, working a lot with spinal cord injury, which I really enjoyed. It was very interesting being the clinical psychologist there. I was the first clinical psychologist at the hospital. And there was a big social work department and, of course, physio and OT, but there were no psychologists there. And also being the clinical psychologist who has a disability too, which I think gave me a lot of credibility. And that was incredibly rewarding. And then just over time, I've always had an interest in the psychological adjustment to disability. There are quite a number of clients that I see for therapy that maybe have physical disabilities, whether they are congenital or later in life. But as much as it's an interest, it's definitely not the majority of the work that I do. I've got quite a generalized practice, but over the years, I've focused on my strengths, and my strengths are definitely working with adults and individual therapy. So there's certain things that I refer out to, like child psychology, couples therapy, addiction. I think over time you kind of learn the things that you don't really have maybe as much passion or skills to work on, and focus on what you really love and you're truly passionate about. And for me, that has been also my therapeutic focus. As I've grown in private practice, I focused on cognitive behavioral therapy. And over the last couple of years, I've got much more focused on schema therapy, which is a modality that fits within cognitive behavioral therapy. So they work very nicely together. And there are not a lot of people that practice schema therapy in South Africa. It's very popular in Australia, Europe, and America, but it's definitely gaining momentum. So that's my main area of interest in psychology, is working with adults, dealing with various issues, but just really helping people to adjust and thrive.
So how did you go from working in hospitals, government hospitals? And actually, before I ask you that, I just want to say that it is very weird. I think we've kind of missed each other like by a hair inch. You know, you want to watch that movies where like people's lives are parallel. Because
Yes.
I'm not joking with you. I did my community service at Lentegeur Forensic OT department.
Oh, wow.
And then, and no, I didn't. No, I'm lying. I did my community service at Conradie Hospital, which became, now I'm confusing
WCRC. That's where I
No, I did my community service at Lentegeur Hospital, forensic unit, and then I went to work at Conradie before they were WCRC. I was part of the OT team when we moved to Lentegeur's grounds and became WCRC. And I still remember clearly in our management meetings and all of that, we spoke about the idea, the fact that we needed a psychologist, because I came from a mental health background. We, as OTs, we all recognize holistic. These people need like psychological intervention. So it's so weird. Like, I think we kind of like just missed each other in all of these experiences. Yes. But now, I mean, you were working there, which is a government hospital. So how did you go from that into private practice? Like, how did you decide it's time for me to go on my own, and what was that journey like?
Okay. Well, you know, I always mention that, you know, the fact remains, I think, in many health professions in South Africa, but particularly psychology, is there not a lot of permanent posts in government. And I think if a permanent post had magically arisen when I finished my community service, I probably would have slipped into that quite easily, just having that kind of security and safety of a permanent job. But there were no positions at the time when I qualified after community service. So I actually, you know, when I think back, when I was looking at some of your questions and thinking back to my younger self, I had a lot of confidence 19 years ago. So I actually remember towards the end of community service thinking, okay, well, now I've got to make a living. What am I going to do? What do I like to do? What do I not like to do? And I actually approached the WCRC and asked them if I could work there. And I think it was probably just very well timed, because they were thinking about it. They just moved from Conradie. So that's why it was a sessional post, 10 hours a week. And then I thought, well, this is ideal, because at least it gives me some stability, some guaranteed income. And at the time, I was also lecturing part-time at Varsity College in Rondebosch. So I was lecturing psychology students, which I really loved. So I had that was kind of my stability, the lecturing and the sessional work. And then I set up my private practice. So it was a part-time private practice that I started 2 days a week in Milnerton, where I'm based. And I found sessional rooms at a speech therapy practice. They had rooms available. And that speech therapist also was very interested in disability and neurocognitive work. So it was kind of a nice introduction into private practice. But like I said, Nicky was so confident. I mean, I just thought like, well, yeah, start a private practice. Let me go meet the doctors. And here I am. I'm very young, actually. You know, I'm one of those people that came fresh out of studies, you know, into the working world. I mean, what on earth did I know about life 19 years ago? I still laugh at myself. And I went confidently to these GPs, introducing myself. I remember making my business cards, and the person at the, you know, that printing shop, she says, another psychologist. I mean, how many psychologists are there in this area? Like, how are you even going to work? Like, how are you going to find patients? I'm like, no, no problem. How negative is this person? So anyway, I think maybe I needed to have that blind confidence to get going. And I didn't know anything about running a business. I remember like buying a cash receipts book at, you know, C&A, and like really learning things from scratch. Didn't know about medical aid. But I just learned, and I think learned by default. Made a lot of mistakes, learned on the way. A lot of my friends, we started private practice together, so we supported each other. And then maybe a year or so later, I met a psychiatrist that was new to the area, and he was setting up a practice, and he listened to me presenting at a networking meeting, and he came up to me and said, I'd love you to join my practice. And that's really when I think my practice took off, is just having his support and credibility, moving into Milnerton Mediclinic, which was always so interesting. I thought, like, just because your name's attached to a hospital, suddenly you know, you get a lot more referrals, doctors trust you more. And I learned a lot along the way. Also, again, still making more mistakes and learning and helping others. And eventually, a few years after that, I built my own practice. So rooms became available at the hospital, and I decided to take the plunge of having my own rooms and really running my business full time. So yeah, there's been an interesting weave of events over the years that has got me to where I am today.
That's amazing. So, you know, you mentioned that it was a big learning experience. The difficulty I have with asking private practice owners who have been in practice for so long about what they would do, you know, if they started a practice today, is that you can't actually compare 19 years ago's market to today, because the world of business has changed so much. So you would have had to constantly learn and adapt. So instead of asking, you know, what was the lessons you learned from when you started, I would say, what would you say, knowing what you know about the current market and being in practice currently, if you had to, if, you know, 19 years ago, Nicky had to go in a time machine and come to today's day and age and start a practice today, what would you tell, you know, 19 years ago, Nicky, today, how to start a practice today? What would be your biggest tips?
Okay, I definitely think it would be all about having a digital presence. I think that that's the number one thing nowadays to get your practice to grow quickly. And that is, you know, perhaps it's not fair to say it's the number one, but I think it's a combination of two then. It's the digital presence. So to build a website, get onto as many listings as possible. And maybe because maybe 19 years ago, Nicky in 2024 would have been keen to have a YouTube channel and do all the Instagram stories and everything. This old Nicky is not so keen to do those things. But I think that that's a great way to get your name out there, get people to see footage of you. I mean, we're selling ourselves, and people need to feel comfortable and feel like I can connect with this person. I like what they have to say. And the best way to do that is actually through video content. So I do know for sure that my TEDx talk has helped me get my name out there, and people can watch my talk and get to know a little bit about me and my sense of humor and, a little bit about my life story, which often people come to see me for therapy because they like that story and they feel comfortable knowing that, kind of I put my message into practice. So I think that's what I would do, the digital presence. And then secondly, of course, connections. And I think that's where I've always been strong with connections, meeting other people. I think in 2024, your best bet of starting a practice is to get to know psychologists who have got a lot more experience, a very built up business, who need to refer their overflow. I think that's your number one link to the digital presence, is really just having those connections and referral sources that can really boost your business quite quickly.
And if you think about it, the two are kind of interlinked. And if we look at your journey, you mentioned quite early on you did lecturing at Varsity College, and then you said this first psychiatrist that kind of kicked off your practice saw you speak at a networking event. Then you had this TEDx. While the speaking at the networking event isn't online, it's the same thing. You are basically, putting yourself in a public platform. So that leads me to the question that I'm curious about. How did you then get into public speaking? Like, what was what led you to that? And then how did it grow into something that was an additional thing besides clinical psychology? It wasn't just like I'm speaking here and there. It actually became something you were doing.
Okay, and that's also like, such an interwoven story. And like you said earlier, that certain things happen in life and it kind of opens up a door in a different avenue. So I would definitely say that 19 years ago, I would have rather died than gone on stage and told people about my life story. I was very much a psychologist that loves to listen, but not talk about themselves. And the only reason that I started doing public speaking and more like inspirational talks, it really is linked to me starting Nicky's Drive. So when I registered Nicky's Drive as a nonprofit was 2011. Back then I was thinking, spoke to other people that had nonprofit organizations, and obviously the biggest challenge with that is funding. And I thought, I don't want to actually have to ask people for money. I mean, I hate doing that.
Yeah.
So then I thought to myself, well, what could I do to generate an income for Nicky's Drive? And then I thought to myself, well, on the odd occasion, people have asked me to do talks. Maybe that's a way, companies pay for speakers to speak at conferences. Maybe that's a way to generate an income for Nicky's Drive. But I'd always loved public speaking. So it was kind of a natural progression for me. So in my adult years, I'd done Toastmasters, and, I kind of got better at the skill of public speaking and had a few coaches and mentors help me to get to my TEDx talk and putting something together that has value for the people sitting in the audience. So it's a combination of my life story and then obviously skills that I've learned as a clinical psychologist. So my main keynote talk is about cultivating optimism and looking at key life lessons, which include believing in yourself, focusing on what you can do, learning to tolerate uncertainty, and then adopting an attitude of gratitude. So that's how the talk came about. And like I said, it took a lot of courage. It made me have to step into quite a vulnerable state to be on stage as a psychologist speaking about myself. I think the first couple of years I spoke, I just wished that no psychologist was ever going to be in the audience. Like I'd be thinking, like, I can't believe she's doing such a thing.
Yes.
Because, we really were trained to kind of be like this mystery, which I don't necessarily agree with. And here I was like opening up about who I am. But it was a really important journey, and it's actually just progressed from there. And I really loved the public speaking and joined the Professional Speakers Association of South Africa, where I've been a member for a number of years. I'd say well over 10 years now. And that really boosted my speaking confidence, and also learning about the business of public speaking and the business of doing corporate talks that are packaged for what companies need, and what are their biggest problems with employees, and what are they struggling with in sales. And you learn so much. And I think it's very much linked to also how I learned about the business of running a private practice. Doesn't come naturally to us as health professionals. We're just about caring and helping, and like wanting to be kind of self-sacrificing, but then recognizing, but we actually have to look after ourselves as well, and this is our career. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey of doing a combination of the therapy and the talking.
But you mentioned Nicky's drive and the talking and the practice, and there's this common theme around, which I see in a lot of my audience members as well, of this fear of asking for money, whether it's your actual rate that you deserve because you're doing the work, or whether it's even for a charity. I mean, I'm with the Josie for Autism nonprofit, and it's the same thing. Like, I'm not even asking for me, and yet I feel like terrible asking for money. And the same, I mean, Nicky's Drive is a charity, and yet you didn't want to ask. But then you did like the public speaking, and you still have to ask for money because they have to pay you for the service, right?
Yes.
And you see people charging these exorbitant amounts of money for talks, and then you don't even want to charge like the small amount, right? Especially like in the beginning. So talk to me a little bit about that. Did you see that? Like, what was your money journey in terms of your money mindset, and like actually asking for your rate that you have set? How did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think it's always an ongoing challenge because, as I said, being in a health profession, we didn't study accounting, and it's been a difficult journey in the beginning. But I think over time, it's a lot about experience, and you realizing that people are investing in you, and the kind of work you've done behind the scenes. So sometimes you think like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this person's charging so much for a conference talk. But actually, it's the years and years of experience, life that they've led, the what they want to share with the audience. It's not just an hour. It takes many years of experience and learning and growth to get to that point. So I think that that's something I've definitely learned. And the more you are connected with peers and you share this difficulty, and you hash it out together and you boost each other, and I think that that's what's so important. I know in your practice growth club, I'm sure that's a topic that often comes out, and I supervise a lot of new psychologists to private practice, and it is so hard for them saying like, but is it really worth that for that hour? and it's, and I think that's the thing, is that people are used to like, okay, I'm going to buy this bunch of bananas and there's 6 bananas, so it's worth it. And it's more difficult sometimes to quantify what we can give. But yeah, it's definitely taken a while. I mean, I do feel that I've come a long way. I mean, sometimes people say like, I'm so business savvy, but really it's from experience and really just knowing, your time is also valuable, and to know what you're worth. And I think that that's an important message for everybody in this profession and every profession.
Yeah. So that brings me to around the topic of the starting private practice bootcamp. So you obviously, you've done cohorts, like a few cohorts. I know at the time of recording this, which is the 31st of May, you're going to be doing one on Sunday, right? So obviously by the time this goes up, you would have already done that. But you obviously have to be very in tune with what would be psychologists' greatest struggles or challenges or obstacles, in order to provide them with the information and resources and support to overcome that. So from your experience, when you put together this bootcamp, what are the kind of key things that you address that, will really help these private practice psychologists move forward and grow their practices?
Well, you know, where the idea of the boot camp, it was also like a bit of a journey. So I've always loved sharing my knowledge with others, which is actually quite unusual amongst psychologists. I don't know, people are a little
I
bit
think it's
guarded.
among all health professionals in private practice, which really comes from a very scarcity mindset. But yeah, there
Yes,
are very few of us that like to tell everybody all the secrets. Yeah.
exactly. So I had to find out these secrets along the way. Nobody gave them to me.
Hmm.
And then when it was COVID, I just thought now I've got a lot more time. You know, prior to COVID, I was traveling a lot for conference talks, traveling internationally as well as, nationally. So I didn't always have a lot of time to follow this passion. And then I thought, okay, now I've got the time. So I started out with running private practice support groups. And we'd have different topics at each meeting. Like one topic might be medical aids and invoicing. Another topic would be marketing your practice. But then what I found was different people attended different meetings based on their availability. And then they might have missed one. And then
Hmm.
they didn't have that information and then they joined the next one. And they might be asking questions that were already covered in the previous group. So then I thought, like, how can I fix this? So then I thought, let me set up a boot camp. So it's not going to be a support group focus, but rather just information. And I use the word boot camp because if anyone's done physical boot camp, like it's hectic. It's a lot all at once, and you kind of want to die afterwards. But I tell people I don't want you to want to die after this boot camp, but I want you to have the most information you can. I know it's going to be information overload, but the thing is, you need all this information to empower you. And as you go on your journey, more questions will come up and things will make sense.
Hmm.
So I decided, because people's time is so precious, and I know to actually have a full day workshop, it's just impossible for people to have that time. So I made
Hmm.
the boot camp 2.5 hours. And what I did was, the way I put it together was, I thought about myself 19 years ago in that speech therapy office on a Tuesday and
Yeah.
a Thursday. And what would I have appreciated knowing then? So I literally do this boot camp from scratch. I start out with 5 things I wish I knew when I started private practice. And then I go on to the very basics. So there's quite a variety of people in the group. There are psychologists, registered counselors, sometimes psychometrists, psychiatrists. I've had OTs as well on the occasion, but obviously it's focused more from a psychologist's
Hmm.
perspective. But it's so much information, and some people are still doing community service. Some people have just started their practice, or some people have been working maybe in government or at schools and are thinking about starting a
Hmm.
practice. Or some people have even been in private practice for 10 years and they think, like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, let me
Yeah.
check if I'm on the right track. So because it's so varied, I just start from scratch, give them a lot of resources, a lot of information, like the basics, setting up your diary, invoicing, how medical aids work, the ethics around marketing, the basics, the groundwork. And then I think the greatest value of the boot camp is that once you've joined the boot camp, you get entry to my private Facebook group.
Okay.
And there I encourage people, I'll say, you've got all this information. And maybe say somebody in community service right now is not sending out invoices until September this year, like maybe
Hmm.
in a few months' time. And when you send out your first invoice, you're like, what did Nicky say in that boot camp? So I wanted that Facebook group to be an added support, that then you can say, Nicky, remind me, what did I need to put on my invoice? Or as time goes on, people can post questions and I get back to them. But it's a wonderful community where I always encourage people, there's no such thing as a silly question. So, ask the simplest things, because I think that's what people are afraid of. Like, they
Hmm.
don't even know, like, what is a tax invoice? What does that mean? What
Yeah.
does it mean if something's tax deductible? What is a PMB? I've had someone do my boot camp that thought PMB meant Pietermaritzburg, and it's prescribed minimum benefits.
Yeah.
And and that's the thing, it's, you want to have the space to ask those questions, and maybe they're questions that I was too afraid to ask. And I mean, I didn't even have Google back then. So yeah, it's really the basics, and it's creating a community that's encouraging, because I've actually seen, and I'm sure you see it as well with your programs that you run, the more you give, the more other people want to give. So it almost becomes contagious when you're answering somebody's question. Then suddenly everybody wants to answer the question. So I've definitely seen a big shift in the psychology field as well. Online people are far more helpful, supportive, not as competitive. I mean, there always will be that. But I do think that things have shifted a lot due to social media, due to other people kind of modeling this helping behavior. Why not help?
No, absolutely. I agree with you. And I mean, the whole reason why Private Practice Growth Club started was similarly, when I went back into, I actually had a digital marketing business for a bit. Don't ask, long story. But then I went back into, OT. I was doing like OT contracting here and there, but I went back into OT, and I started to see a lot of questions in like the allied groups around like business related stuff. And so I was more asking, not as a private practice owner, because I didn't have one at the time, but more from my knowledge from digital marketing and ethical marketing and being a health professional myself and then running a business, and from that angle. But I saw that there wasn't a lot of resources, like even our associations weren't really doing these things. Other practitioners weren't really sharing. I noticed that trend. And I've noticed since I started Private Practice Growth Club, everybody is now noticed that this is what people need. So all the associations now also have boot camps, courses, and it's wonderful. And for me, it's important to model what I'm preaching around collaboration over competition. So, for example, the Institute for Occupational Therapists in Private Practice, INSTOP, they are doing similar to what Private Practice Growth Club does, but I have them on my YouTube channel. I share their courses, and it would be like, it wouldn't make sense on the surface because technically they are like my competitors, but I don't see that way, because to me, it's like the more of us are doing this, the more people can get help from who they relate to, because I'm not for everyone. InStop is not for everyone. You are not for everyone. The next Sashla is not for everyone. So you go and sign up for the program where you can connect. This is like, for me, this is my people. This is what where I feel comfortable and safe to ask the questions. And the more of that we have, the more the industry grows, the more the need grows, and the more customers we all have. So it's a win-win for everyone, right? Because if we have no competitors, it means that there's no customers, which means there's no business. So, you fail that way. So definitely, I agree. It's contagious. The more you help, the more you're willing to help, the more other people see, well, I can't keep this behind a paywall, and because that person's just giving all the information away for free. So I might as well also give information away for free. And then we can all charge for that extra little bit of extra special sauce. But I think that probably, as a psychologist with psychology practices, that support that you mentioned is one of the biggest things, because information, you can get the information if you dig, but it's more that personal touch of the support of having other people understand what you're going through or have been through what you have been through, and you can learn from the experience is really what people connect with. So that's amazing.
And I mean, I think it's great because, like, even you and I, we inter-refer. Sometimes I meet someone and they're interested in the boot camp, and then I think actually you're more suited to what Tasneem has to offer. And the other programs out there as well that I recommend. I don't think it is competitive because, like you say, each offering out there has different values, and you connect differently with different people, and also in the profession. That it makes sense that OTs would want to hear from an OT and psychologists might want to hear from another psychologist. But it's wonderful how we can link together and share information, because that's what it's all about.
And it's really a model of what we should be doing in private practice as well, because a lot of, especially in the allieds, because with OTs and things like that, it's because people don't really know what OT does. So I'll speak from an OT point of view. OTs tend to be like hyper, like territorial because, that one's going to steal my business because there isn't a lot because people don't know what we do. Whereas now there's this new generation of OTs who are recognizing actually if we share and we refer it's the same thing. Instead of thinking of that OT as a competitor, if you promote the profession as a whole, then more people will want to come to OT, which means that you will all be able to get clients. So it's kind of also modeling for me. It's modeling what we should be doing in our practices as well. It's a helping profession. So if you show that you are a helper, then by default, you will get more people looking for help. Yeah. But speaking about helping, one of the things that especially allies, so many OTs that I speak to, their heart is really about wanting to give free therapy, right? Which is not sustainable, obviously, because you still have to make a living. And so, I think 90% of the OTs that I've spoken to in private practice all have this dream of having a charity on the side or a nonprofit on the side. So for them, listening to someone like you who has done that successfully, you've got a private practice that's thriving, and you've got Nicky's Drive, which is also doing well. What kind of tips and advice would you give to those practitioners who do want to do this, give back to the community in some way?
Well, I think it's wonderful. And I think, my feeling is that all health professionals need to give back in different ways, but do it that makes it feasible for you. And also because our work is really hard and we are always at risk of burnout. If we're trying to do too many things, in schema therapy, we call it the self-sacrifice schema. And health professionals all have a self-sacrifice schema, putting others' needs ahead of our own. So that's why it is, like you say, quite common for people wanting to set up a charity. My feeling is, and I also recommend this to psychologists, is because there is this guilt that we have at times that, not everybody can afford our services and there is a great need out there. But you have to make things practical for you. And I think it's about having your giving back to be more focused. And that means that it's got better boundaries in place. So it's not all over the place. Suddenly you're seeing a lot of people in private practice pro bono, and then you can't cope with it because now everybody wants to see you pro bono, and then you're getting resentful because you're paying for this practice, but no one's paying you. So rather set boundaries and have it in your mind, and your practice policy is, how many sessions would I be able to offer per month pro bono? What is realistic? Because anything counts. And then also to think about formalizing it, and not necessarily, I know it is this wild idea, and I am an overachiever by setting up Nicky's Drive, but I've kept strong limits on what Nicky's Drive can and can't do. But instead of maybe thinking about starting another charity, rather think about teaming up with an existing charity, which I think is what you're doing. So it's about thinking about, there's so many charities out there that need resources. So using a psychologist's point of view is maybe for instance, I've got a friend and a colleague who's always donated time to Cape Mental Health. So since she started practicing also 19 years ago, she's always committed to a certain amount of hours for Cape Mental Health every month. And that is really rewarding for her. But then there's the structure in place. She doesn't have to worry about funding and, all the back scenes of, the Department of Social Development and getting your tax certificates and all of that. It's complicated. Think about how you can give back, but maybe connecting with an existing organization. Because we don't need hundreds of charities, rather streamline help and see where you can fit in. And then also, like I said, prevent burnout. Make sure that the amount of time is feasible for you, not only financially, but emotionally.
Absolutely. That's such excellent advice. And we found that with Josie for Autism. I mean, we started Josie for Autism, but not as a, like a proper entity. And we piggybacked off Autism South Africa already exists. They have a structure in place. And so we work very closely with them, all our things we do. And we decided early on that instead of making this where we raise money and we run programs, there are already organizations running programs. So we kind of do focus on what we're good at, which is the awareness raising and creating events, and then we fundraise that way, and then we choose existing charities, because funding is always an issue, that are already running programs and doing the work, or schools or organizations, and then we rather give of our fundraising towards those, because then they can do that work.
Yes.
So yeah, definitely I agree with you. It's instead of competing then against, it's again that thing of we work together. And I also think that giving back doesn't always, because it's again that thing of how do we make it tangible. So we think that, oh, you need to give up an hour of your time, but the time doesn't have to be your skill in your profession. If you use your platforms to create awareness, or to educate, or to provide people with the tools who can't afford to access therapy, that they can still at least get by, that in itself is charity. So, and a lot of people ask about like ethical marketing, and my thing is that if it comes from a good place, what you are doing, you are advocating for your profession, and you are sharing knowledge and information to people out there that can help them, you are putting yourself as an authority, but which gives you marketing, clout. But it's not from a point of selling me, I'm the best. It's actually by giving back. So if you give, you will receive. It's that whole thing, right? And I think what you do, like from looking at your journey, that is basically kind of epitomizes what you do and what you stand for. Like you give so much, and in return, you have a practice, and you have Nicky's Drive, and you get this award. What was the award that you got for speaking? I think
I got the Speakers Hall of Fame for the
Speakers Hall of Fame. There you go. And I think I think a lot of your achievements, you keep saying you're an overachiever. I don't think it's that you're an overachiever. I think that a lot of your achievements and accolades and recognition comes from, you come across as a very authentic, kind of genuinely giving person, and that comes back to you in return, so yeah, and I think that's a wonderful model and example for other practitioners. If they're watching this, that's kind of what the lens you need to look through to grow your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think it was wonderful having this conversation with you. So I will obviously put all your information in the description box below. People can follow you on LinkedIn, on your platforms. And so then when you do have the next bootcamp, then they, if they are interested in that, they can get to know about it. If they are interested in Nicky's Drive, they can get to know about it. And if anybody wants to book you for a talk or things like that, any corporates, and I think it would be nice to see more of the corporates in the health space, like booking someone like yourself, like those practice management firms and the banks and all of those things. So yeah, if they need to get hold of you for any of those things, then they can find all that information below. Are there any last words or any last things that you want to say before we sign?
I think, always one of my favorite quotes comes from Positive Psychology. So I'll leave everyone with, the basic premise of positive psychology, and that is, don't ignore what is wrong, but focus more on what is right. And I think that that's very good advice, not only in our personal lives, but also in our business lives. That sometimes there can be a lot of things that are wrong. And if we keep looking at all of those things, we're not going to move forward. So try and focus more on what is right.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nicky. And I look forward to seeing what new adventures you have in store for you in the future.
Thanks, Tasneem.